When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, 15 republics emerged from the ruins. Among them Russia and Ukraine, bound by centuries of shared language, blood, and empire. But while Russia grieved the fall as a geopolitical catastrophe, Ukraine saw it as liberation. For decades, Ukraine walked a fragile path, balancing east and west. Its military inherited Soviet stockpiles, but it slowly tilted toward Europe. In Moscow, Kremlin strategists watched with growing unease. They saw NATO expanding, former Warsaw Pact states flipping westward, and Ukraine's shifting allegiance was unacceptable. It wasn't just political. It was existential. The spark that ignited Ukraine's revolution was not a bullet or a bomb. It was a signature withheld. In 2013, Ukraine stood at a crossroads. The European Union offered an association agreement, a landmark trade and political deal. For many Ukrainians, especially in the West and in Kiev, this agreement symbolized a future tethered to Europe, a future of transparency, reform, and prosperity, free from Russia's shadow. Negotiations had been underway for years. By November, the deal was ready. EU leaders anticipated Yanukovych's signature at the Eastern Partnership Summit in Vilnius. But at the 11th hour, he backed out. Why? The reasons were layered: economic pressure, political survival, and raw Kremlin leverage. Russian economic blackmail. In the months leading up to the EU summit, Moscow began a targeted economic squeeze. Russia blocked Ukrainian exports, canceled energy discounts, and issued veiled threats of a trade war. Ukraine's economy, already fragile, began to suffer. Factories halted. Borders clogged. Putin's message was clear: sign with Europe and pay the price. $15 billion Russian lifeline. Russia offered a carrot with its stick, a $15 billion bailout, and heavily discounted gas prices. For a cash-strapped Ukraine, that offer was tempting. Yanukovych, under growing pressure from his oligarch backers, saw Russian money as a short-term rescue, not the EU's long-term austerity demands. Fear of EU conditions. The EU deal came with strings: judicial reforms, anti-corruption enforcement, and the release of political prisoners, including former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko. Signing would weaken Yanukovych's grip on power and expose his administration to scrutiny. Pressure from within the regime. Pro-Russian elements within Yanukovych's Party of Regions and Ukraine's Eastern business elite, many of whom profited from opaque trade with Russia, lobbied heavily to torpedo the EU deal. They feared losing control over their regional power networks. So, on November 21, 2013, Yanukovych walked away. No speech, no vote, just a decree, suspending preparations for the EU agreement. Kiev erupted overnight. Students took to Maidan Square with flags and candles. Their chants echoed, "Ukraine is Europe." What began as peaceful protests soon escalated. Police attacked sleeping demonstrators. The movement exploded into a national uprising, Euromaidan, and behind the scenes, Moscow celebrated. The battle for Ukraine's direction had begun. With Ukraine in chaos, Putin moved. In the early dawn of February 27, 2014, unidentified gunmen seized Crimea's regional parliament. No flags, no insignia, but discipline, weapons, and coordination betrayed their identity: Russian special forces. Over the next 48 hours, military installations across Crimea were neutralized without a single shot fired. Ukrainian commanders were surrounded, their families threatened. Some defected. Others stood down, outnumbered and leaderless. March 16th, a hastily organized referendum under Russian military presence. Official results claimed overwhelming support for annexation. Days later, Putin declared Crimea part of the Russian Federation. The West condemned. Sanctions followed. But the world had blinked. Russia had redrawn Europe's map and paid no meaningful price. Crimea was only the beginning. By April 2014, unrest spilled into eastern Ukraine. Armed men seized government buildings in Donetsk, Luhansk, Sloviansk. They wore civilian clothes, but their gear Russian-grade. Their call signs, familiar to intelligence circles. Moscow called them local patriots. But their commanders reported to the GRU. They proclaimed two self-declared republics, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic. Kiev responded with force, launching anti-terrorist operations. Ukraine's military, under-equipped and fractured by decades of corruption, clashed with hybrid militias using advanced weapons. Russia supplied tanks, manpads, and volunteers. Fighters flowed in from Chechnya and Transnistria. What began as civil unrest had evolved into a proxy war. Two battles defined the early phase of the Donbas War, Ilovaisk and Debaltsev. In August 2014, Ukrainian troops surrounded Ilovaisk, hoping for a quick victory. But they walked into a trap. Russian regulars, no longer hiding behind militia fronts, struck back. Tanks rolled in. Ukrainian units were encircled. Under white flags, a corridor was promised. But as soldiers retreated, they were ambushed. Over 300 killed. Hundreds wounded or captured. The message was clear. Russia was now directly in the fight. Debaltsev followed in 2015. A key rail hub, the separatists wanted it. Ukrainian forces dug in under relentless shelling. Artillery shattered entire city blocks. Close-quarters trench combat returned to Europe. When the town finally fell, it marked another turning point and revealed the limitations of diplomacy. On July 17, 2014, a commercial flight vanished from radar over the war-torn skies of eastern Ukraine. Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, en route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was cruising at 33,000 feet when it was struck by a Russian-made Buk missile launched from separatist-held territory near the town of Snizhny. The missile exploded near the cockpit. The aircraft disintegrated midair. All 298 people on board were killed, including dozens of children and nearly 200 Dutch citizens. Investigations later confirmed the missile system belonged to Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Brigade and had crossed the border into Ukraine just a day earlier. Why this incident mattered? Until that moment, the war in Donbas had been viewed by much of the world as a contained regional conflict. MH17 shattered that illusion. The deaths of innocent civilians from 10 countries, including the Netherlands, Australia, and the UK, brought the war to the international stage. Sanctions against Russia intensified, and Western intelligence publicly confirmed direct Russian involvement in eastern Ukraine. MH17 wasn't just a tragedy. It was a line crossed, one that turned a quiet proxy war into a global crisis. In late 2014, and again in early 2015, diplomacy took center stage. The Minsk I and II agreements, brokered by France and Germany, aimed to halt the bloodshed. From 2015 to 2021, the war smoldered. Nearly 14,000 people died. Front lines barely shifted. Russia held Crimea. Donbas remained fractured. Ukraine rearmed, training with NATO, modernizing its forces. But Russia wasn't idle. By late 2021, satellite images showed something ominous. Over 150,000 Russian troops, armor, and missiles amassed near Ukraine's borders. Belarus hosted joint exercises. Crimea turned into a fortress. The warnings came. Intelligence reports screamed invasion. But few believed Putin would go all the way. And yet, on February 24, 2022, he did. But that is a story for the next episode. Watch our next episode, The Invasion Begins, February 24, 2022, as missiles rain down, paratroopers land, and Ukraine faces the unthinkable.